right now, today, this morning, somewhere in America, there is a handful of men army crawling through mud, pulling trucks with ropes, and getting blasted by fire hoses, all while getting screamed at by a quasi-drill instructor. And for this privilege, that is the privilege of crawling through mud and getting screamed at, they have paid thousands and thousands of dollars, some as much as $18,000. These alpha male boot camps, as they're known, they promise to make you a real man. They promise power, they promise success, they promise that if you just grunt loudly enough while flipping over a tractor tire, you will find yourself on top of the pack. One of them advertises themselves as the last bastion of primal male energy. And here I was thinking that was me. There's a lot of laughing going on. I don't know if I quite appreciate that. But if you've never heard of these before, I assure you they are a very real thing. I'm going to show you a quick clip here from one of them. I have turned off the sound because the language used in them is quite spicy, and we're trying to run a wholesome-ish establishment here. So this is Alpha Male Camp. All right, I think we get the gist. Real things. People pay money for that. They're willingly subjecting themselves to that. And it's not just these camps. Right now, there is a whole online world of influencers who are inundating young men with a constant barrage of this kind of hyper-masculine, be an alpha or be a loser type media. It's the type of stuff that insists that a man's worth is measured in dominance, not in character, and that vulnerability is some kind of moral failure. Chief among these influencers is a guy named Andrew Tate. Some people have heard of this guy. Here he is pictured wearing a shirt that has a picture of himself on it, which I think we can agree is a pretty alpha move, right? In recent years, Tate was in lockup in Romania on human trafficking charges, so great guy. But even still, he is one of the loudest voices in this so-called alpha male movement. He's built an entire business empire on mocking empathy, belittling women, and telling boys that being a man means being mean, entirely without empathy or compassion. And you know how they say that if you go far enough left or right, you end up coming back to the other side? Well, Tate is so obsessed. He is so obsessed with projecting strength. He is so allergic to anything that he considers feminine that this is an actual position that he has staked out. And when I say it, you're going to scratch your head and say, huh? Did a human being really say this? But there's tweets to back this up. This is his position. That the gayest thing a man can do is have intimate relations with a woman. And conversely, the most hetero thing a man can do is have intimate relations with other men. Yep. Exactly. I wish I was making this up, and I also wish that we could write this guy off as just another loudmouth online jabroni. But a survey done this year, 2025, by YouGov, shows that as many as 1 in 4, that is 25% of boys aged 6 to 15, view Andrew Tate as a positive influence. Right? That's a scary number. Because it means that all of this chest-thumping, fire hose blasting, empathy mocking nonsense is an actual force to be contended with. It's affecting real children, and it's shaping how a whole generation thinks about what it means to be a man. But into all this macho noise that we are talking about this morning steps the character of Joseph. Joseph, who you may have noticed, does not utter a single word in the story, not a one. I'm very proud of that slide. Joseph's story is one that begins in crisis, when he discovers that his bride-to-be Mary is pregnant. While he knows nothing else about the circumstances of that pregnancy, he does know one thing, and that is that he is not the father. And in first century Palestine, that is no small thing. If he chose to, Joseph could have brought formal charges against Mary. He could have protected his reputation by publicly naming her as unfaithful. He could have cleared his name, reclaimed any bride price or gifts exchanged between the families, and let the consequences fall squarely on her. And to be clear, those consequences would have been brutal. At very best, Mary would have faced a lifetime of shame and exclusion, and at very worst, she would have been cast out of her community or even stoned. But fortunately for Mary, Matthew tells us that Joseph was a righteous man. And righteous in the New Testament doesn't mean super religious, it doesn't mean self-righteous, but it means a person who does what is right and merciful and good. And so being a righteous man as he was, Joseph plans to break off his engagement to Mary quietly as to spare her as much shame as he possibly can. He does not have to do this, but he chooses to do this because of the kind of man that he is. But then we're told that an angel appears to Joseph in a dream and tells him not to be afraid. Do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife. Do not be afraid to step into this messy, scandalous dynamic, a dynamic that quite possibly will cost you, Joseph, socially, financially, relationally, and yet will somehow bring God's love into the world in a new and profound way. And when Joseph wakes up, he does exactly as God asks of him. No argument, no bravado, just simple humility and obedience. He takes Mary as his wife, and when the baby is born, he names him Jesus. And in that culture, naming a child was an act of claiming them as your own. And I want us to pause there for just 1 second. Because Joseph claiming Jesus as his own is one of the most overlooked but most important moments in the Christmas story, and arguably one of the most important moments in the Bible. Because we tend to think about and talk about Jesus as though he leapt out of the womb fully formed. And although a lot of medieval art did, in fact, depict him like that, there's the man-child Jesus. I think we can agree the artist was doing no one any favors in that portrait. That is simply not the case. The boy who grew up to heal the sick and lift up the poor and forgive people that everybody else had written off, that boy was raised by a very real human father who taught him what it meant to be a good man. So just think about that for a minute. Where did Jesus learn to center mercy over judgment? Where does that come from? I mean, maybe it came from the man who could have ruined Mary's life and restored his own honor with a single public accusation, but instead chose the quiet path that shielded her from shame. Where did Jesus learn to listen for God in the quiet hours of the night? Maybe from the father who trusted a dream more than his own wounded pride and let God's whispered calling shape his entire future. Where did Jesus learn to see holiness in the ordinary and dignity in the work of average people? Maybe from his carpenter father who spent his days shaping wood and fixing what was broken and showed him that God is present in the small, faithful work that keeps a community alive. And where did Jesus learn that real strength serves instead of dominates, lifts up rather than tears down. Most likely from the man who raised him not because he had to, but because love made him choose to stay. A man whose steady, dependable presence and costly yes became the ground that Jesus grew up on. This is Jesus' inheritance from Joseph. Not alpha posturing, not macho bravado, but a masculinity rooted in compassion and courage and humility. But here we are 2,000 later, living in a world where the loudest voices that many young men are hearing are ones that would have written Mary off as, strong language, would have written her off as a whore and dismissed Joseph as a weak beta male. Voices like Andrew Tate's are climbing into their headphones, their algorithms, and their late-night scrolls, and if no one interrupts that story, our boys are going to begin to believe that the alpha male is all there is and all they should want to be. And for that reason, we, the church, cannot afford to overlook Joseph. Because Joseph reminds us that there is another way. He offers an alternative script for what a grounded, decent, and courageous life looks like, especially for boys. But as every thespian knows, and we have a number of you among us this morning, a script only comes alive when it gets performed. Which means that every adult in this room, especially every man in this room, but each of us has a part to play in bringing this script to life. We have a part to play in the words that we choose, in the apologies that we make, in how we handle conflict, and how we treat people when we don't think that anybody else is watching. These ordinary choices that we make every day in front of kids, these sketch for them the shape of what strength looks like. They show the next generation what kind of man is worth becoming. So very consciously, I want for us to become a community where boys see men who don't need to posture. Men who can tell truth without cruelty, who can love without flinching. A community where tenderness is respected and self-control is valued, and humility is just part of the air that we breathe. And if we do that, if we get it even 80% right, we may raise men whose lives carry the fingerprints of Joseph, and through Joseph, the unmistakable shape of Jesus himself. Friends, may it be so. Amen.